After a slow start to the 2022 season, Red Bull are riding high once again, dominating on track and taking home victories time and time again.
Oh, that was a very lovely Sunday.
He has held on to that lead, and Max Verstappen wins in Miami. Max Verstappen, from 10th on the grid, comes home to win the Hungarian Grand Prix, winning the Belgian Grand Prix for a second year in a row. It's a 9th victory in Formula One in 2022 for the reigning world champion. Max Verstappen wins the Dutch Grand Prix.
Well done, mate. That was a mega drive.
Another championship victory is within reach for Red Bull and for Max Verstappen, but it's clear that they won't let up until both titles are in the bag. Team principal Christian Horner is sure of that.
That's the DNA of this team, that you've got to go for it. We're an attacking team. We take on challenges, wholeheartedly, and best form of defence is attack, and I think that, that's the same for every single race, that we'll compete in for the rest of this year. And then the championship tables take care of themselves.
That appetite for competition, that determination and that attacking mentality are all themes that permeate through Red Bull Racing from the very top. They have done for years, and while Christian is confident about this year, he's also cautious about the team's burgeoning successes, and with so much at stake, who can blame him?
The focus is on, right, let's do the best we can in every single race, and don't take anything for granted. We're in a healthy position, but it's never done until it's done.
Hello everyone, and welcome to F1 Beyond the Grid with me, Tom Clarkson. I always enjoy sitting down with Christian Horner because he's interesting, he's ambitious, and he's constantly evolving as a team principal. Unbelievably, this is his 18th season as the boss of Red Bull, yet his passion and his hunger for knowledge are more akin to someone just starting out. With this year's all-new technical regulations have come new challenges for all of the teams. Red Bull have mastered them better than anyone, and Christian talks about how they've done that. He also opens up about that dramatic title showdown in Abu Dhabi 2021. He discusses his contentious relationship with Toto Wolff, and he tells us about his unwavering belief in both Max and Sergio Perez. We caught up at Red Bull's headquarters in Milton Keynes, where I found him in reflective mood, and he started by making a reference to when he first came on the show back in 2018. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Christian, thanks for your time. Great to have you back on the show. It's been a while. A lot's gone on.
Yeah, it has. I think the last time we spoke, Daniel Ricciardo had just handed in his chips, literally, during the interview. So yeah, it's definitely been a while.
And funny that Daniel Ricciardo is back on the news agenda in Formula One now. It seems whenever we get together, Daniel's doing something.
Yes, unfortunately, he's been handed his chips. Yeah, which is a great shame, because I think he's a big personality, and he's a great driver, and he's obviously lost his way a bit, but would be great to see him remain in the sport.
But before we come to all things Red Bull, would you employ Daniel Ricciardo next year if you were Alpine?
I think I probably would, to be honest with you. I think that they obviously know him from a couple of seasons ago, and he was, very together during his last season there, scoring podiums, and I think he's the type of guy that I think you could rebuild him. It's obviously been not a great experience for him for whatever reason, and you've just got to think back to some of the drives that he did for us, some of the wins that he had, the podiums, some of the stunning overtakes that he was capable of. That's still in there, I'm sure, and it just needs a bit of a reset.
Have you ever come across a driver to sort of lose their way in the way that Daniel has over the last 2 years? Is it a confidence thing?
Like in all sports, confidence is a big element. And for whatever reason, he hasn't got the feeling from the car and across 2 sets of regulations. So, and that's probably eked away at his confidence. But, there's still a very, very capable driver in there. And you don't just forget how to deliver. So I hope for him he gets another opportunity and gets himself back on the grid for next year.
Well, look, let's do a 180 now and bring it onto Red Bull Racing. It's quite extraordinary what you guys are doing at the minute. You won the driver's title in 2021. You're set up to do the double this year. Would you say the team is operating at a higher level than ever before?
I would say so. I mean, 2021, we were operating at an incredible level, and we finally got a sniff of putting a challenge together for a world championship. And, that was a 22 race, like a championship bout. It was a heavyweight fight from race 1 to race 22. And I think what's been particularly pleasing about this year is, despite the colossal regulation change we had to undergo going into this year, and in all honesty, we thought that we'd probably compromise this year by putting everything that we had into last year. The team came up with an amazing car, with a supercar, and Max has just made another step. Checo's felt more part of the team as well this year, with a lot more familiarity. And to be sitting here now, having won 12 Grand Prix, 16 podiums, I think it is so far, has been an incredible season for us.
How did you manage to nail the new regulations so effectively? How did you split resources at the end of last year?
Well, as I say, we were probably the last team to transition onto the 2022 regulations, and we went quite late on development in 21 because, when you've got a sniff of a championship, we'd have kicked ourselves if we hadn't done everything that we possibly could, to try and win that championship, which meant compromising 2022, and with such a big regulation change. But the team back here in Milton Keynes, whilst we were away racing and fighting for that championship, did an incredible job and had an incredible winter to come up with the RB18 that's been potentially our most successful car ever. And from the first race, we were right there. So tremendously rewarding for the whole team after the colossal effort that went into 2021, and to come out fighting again in 2022. And as a team, I think we've been sharp. We've grabbed our chances. We've taken our chances and created opportunities. I think strategically we've been sharp on the pit wall as well this year. The race team have done a great job across all elements of the business.
You were quick from the first race, as you say, but Max was 40-odd points behind Charles Leclerc after the Australian Grand Prix. What were you thinking at that point?
I'm glad this is a 23-race championship, because we're going to need all of them to get back into it. But it was remarkable how quickly the swing happened. I mean, we had bad reliability in Bahrain, where we're fighting for the win, and we had a fuel cell issue. We then came away from Australia with another issue, and 2 DNFs that early in the season, and a big points delta to Charles in the Ferrari that were really delivering at a super high level and looked very, very competitive. It looked like it was going to be a tall order to claw that amount of points back. But within a couple of races, by the time we'd emerged from Imola, we'd pretty much diminished that entire gap.
Could Ferrari have made your life a little bit harder?
I think they've had a great car this year. They've got 2 very strong drivers. They've had a very quick car, and I think some of the opportunities they haven't taken, and we've managed to convert them and been opportunistic, whether it be strategically or race-wise, to capitalise on those. So they've had a very, very strong car, but I wouldn't say they've been perhaps as complete as we've been this year.
And have you been surprised by Mercedes' relative lack of pace?
Yes, because they transitioned early. They made quite a noise about compromising last year's championship because of moving over very early onto their 2022 car. So, and of course, when their car broke cover, particularly with its upgrade, it looked so radically different that you thought the expectation from seeing how dominant Mercedes have been was that they would be in a very, very similar position. That obviously it hurt last year getting beat, but we felt that they would come back with a renewed vengeance for this year. So quite remarkable that after the domination that they've had for the last 8 years, that sitting here and now they're yet to win a Grand Prix in 2022.
But when you saw the size 0 side pods in Bahrain for the first time, what were you thinking? Was there a bit of a panic? Did you put them in the wind tunnel here just to see what avenue they were pursuing, or were you completely confident in what you were doing?
I think the first question was, is it legal? Because it's a very different interpretation. Of course, it was. And then the guys were pretty convinced early on that they just didn't feel that it would, certainly work within the architecture that we'd created. So there was an inner confidence that we picked the right route. And of course, when the lap time started to come in from that Bahrain test, and you visibly see the cars on track, it didn't look like, that they got a rocket ship, or that we'd missed something fundamental.
Do you feel that we're now entering a new Red Bull era, akin to the one that we had in 2010 to 2013?
Well, look, if we manage to pull off these back-to-back championships, which hopefully we can do with Max, and if we're able to, for the first time in 8 years, be the only team to beat Mercedes to the Constructors' Championship, that's an enormous feat. And it just shows if you never give up, anything is possible. Now, the quality of our competitors is such that I cannot see a period of domination like we've just endured. But, I think we've got a great team. We've got great strength and depth. So by trying to apply the lessons from this year and trying to make RB19, even stronger, I'm sure the others are going to come back fighting very, very hard next year. But only time will tell.
You say it's hard to imagine another period of domination. Is that because the new regs have worked? They have closed the field up. I mean, the evidence of what we're seeing from you guys at the minute is that that's not the case.
Well, it was never going to be the case. When you introduce such radical regulation changes, somebody's going to get it right, somebody's going to get it wrong, and over a period of time, the field will converge. And the most important thing is not to mess with those regulations, to allow that convergence to happen. But I think one thing that the regulations have done is that they have improved the racing. The cars are able to follow closer. And we've seen that at so many events this year where the racing's been fantastic. You think back to those early races in Bahrain and Saudi between Max and Charles. There's been some phenomenal racing. And for Max to have won races like he did in Budapest from 10th on the grid, or Spa from 14th on the grid, just demonstrates that these cars can overtake, they can follow closely, and I think that's been a big step in the right direction.
And you think that with last year's regs, given if you had the same level of domination last year that you had this year, do you think he couldn't have made the progress in those races you've just named?
I don't think so, because I think the cars were so hard to follow. The wake from the car was so interrupting to the car that was following that it was very difficult. But then again, the racing we had in 2021, particularly between Max and Lewis, it was just on another dimension. I mean, those two guys were going at it every weekend, hammer and tong, and it was two titans at the top of their game, and it was fantastic to be part of.
If you're looking for a fun way to learn a new language where you can learn at your own pace and on your own schedule, then look no further than Babbel. Babbel can help you learn a new language with as little as 10 to 15-minute daily lessons, and there's no need to step foot near a classroom to do it. It's available as an app, or you can access it online, so you can log in and take a lesson wherever and whenever you like. There are 14 different languages to choose from, including French, Spanish and German, and what's great is that their interactive lessons are created by more than 150 language experts and voiced by native speakers using a modern conversation-based method focusing on useful vocabulary and real-world conversations, so it doesn't take long before you'll be speaking confidently about real-life topics in another language. And their speech recognition technology can even help you improve your accent and pronunciation. In addition to lessons, you can also access podcasts, games, videos, or even join live classes with a language teacher. Right now, Babbel is offering our listeners 6 months free with a purchase of a 6-month subscription with the promo code GRID. Go to babbel.com/play and use the promo code GRID for an extra 6 months free. That's babbel.com/play, promo code GRID. Babbel, language learning that works. We haven't had you on the show since the showdown last year.
Here comes Lewis Hamilton though, down the back straight. He's got a slipstream. He almost touches Verstappen. They almost make contact. Of all the drama, of all the controversy, of all the magic moments in Formula One in 2021, it comes down to this. Mercedes not happy. Red Bull will be delighted. They have shared a brilliant championship battle, but the championship can only be won by one, and it's going Dutch. 2021, Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world. Yes! Oh my God!
9 months on, how do you reflect on everything that happened, particularly at the end of last year?
I think I've only just recovered.
But you're smiling, actually. But how long did it take you to recover from everything that went on?
Last year took every ounce of energy and commitment that this team had, and we came into 2021 through COVID, having to design the car remotely, and I think that we just did a better job as a team in that difficult period. And to come out of the blocks competitively as we did, to be able to give Max a car for the first time to challenge consistently, and some of the races he drove, last year were phenomenal. He had some bad luck. He had the puncture in Azerbaijan, with the incidents as well that cost a huge amount of points, whether it was at Silverstone or Hungary, or even Monza. They were all quite expensive championship-wise, but races, when you think back to how he delivered in Austin, so many phenomenal victories in Monaco, etc., was, Imola it was a phenomenal season that he put together, and one of total drama. There was a lot going on off track that took as much energy as the on track battle, with an awful lot of politics being played. But it all boiled down to that last lap in Abu Dhabi, and of course there'll be contrasts of opinions on that, but we took our chances and we got the strategy right, and Max still had to go and make the overtake, and he got the job done. And I think when you look at the season, he was the deserving champion when you take into account the points that had been taken away from him. So and of course it was so late in the year, it was literally 2 weeks before Christmas. By the time we'd all gone to the FIA prize giving and everybody got COVID, it was absolute exhaustion by the time you got to the Christmas period.
So how long did it take you to recover? I mean, by Jan 4, when everyone came back into work here, were you ready to go again, or were you still feeling a bit weary?
Well, obviously, once I'd recovered from COVID and was let back in the house on Christmas Day, to spend time with your family and try and forget about Formula One. We then had some downtime over New Year, and then you start to brush yourself down and get ready to go again, and an awful lot easier when you've got the championship trophy in your cupboard. But it was massive for the whole team, and just a sense of pride and joy, and seeing that number one applied to the car for the first time. It was a very emotional moment to see. We've managed what we've managed to do, what we've managed to achieve, and bring it home to Milton Keynes again.
As you say, controversial circumstances in Abu Dhabi. Did you reach out to Michael Massey after the race?
Yes, on a couple of occasions. I felt that it wasn't fair the way he had been treated, because I think that he'd done the best that he could following the principles that had been told. The only thing he screwed up on was not allowing the final two cars at the back of the field to unlap themselves. But everything that he'd done, was absolutely by the book and followed the principles of getting them to finish racing on track. And as we saw recently in Monza, nobody wants to see a race diluted and finished under a safety car. So he did everything to get that race going again, which would have been a horrendous finish to the season to see it just diluted and finished peter out under a safety car. And then I think the reaction after the race, there was a huge amount of abuse centered at him. There was death threats to his family. No individual deserves to go through, what he did.
What do you think of the two race directors that we have now? Is that a solution to the problem?
They're obviously new. They're obviously very competent. They've got experience, but we still see issues obviously happening now and again as they're continuing to learn and evolve. But it's a new chapter within the FIA. I think that, Michael, in difficult circumstances, did the very best he could throughout the year. And we have to remember had very little support in that race control tower. He's left very much on his own up there. And when you follow the process of how they were looking at how cars are unlapped or not, and it's back to pens and pieces of paper, he didn't have all the backup that the teams have, for example, with our operations rooms and the software and so on. It was still a very, very rudimentary process. And there were things that we felt very aggrieved about, earlier in the year, or even earlier in that race, where Max passed Lewis on the first lap and Lewis wasn't instructed to give the place back. And we felt that, again, was, a very harsh decision that had gone against us. We felt there were harsh decisions in Qatar, for example, harsh decisions in Saudi Arabia, and leniency shown at different times. But that's subjective to each individual, where you're probably always going to feel a bit aggrieved by the referee.
Do you think it was right that you and Toto in particular were allowed to lobby and talk to him on the radio?
No, I don't in reality, but that was a precedent that was started. It started with Toto for the first time because the messages started to get broadcast, which I was probably guilty of because I was pushing for that within the Formula One strategy meetings and commission meetings to say that, look, there's an awful lot of intercom that goes on that I think the spectators should be aware of, and that's mainly between the team managers and the referee. And the result of that is that hopefully you may get less of it, but I think it'll be fascinating exchange because the team manager is only going to call up the race director if they feel they've got something really strong to argue. They're not going to bitch about something that's fairly trivial. And it was in Barcelona that suddenly I hear they broadcast Toto on the phone to Mikey. I thought, that's a bit strange, because I'd never had a one-to-one channel. It had always been centered through our team manager. And then it really permeated at Silverstone, where suddenly, there was an awful lot of dialogue suddenly from Toto to Michael. And then he's sending him an email, and then he's coming up. And I thought, right, okay, I'm not having that. I'm going up. Because I felt it was incredibly one-sided that a team principal should not be able to lobby and influence, the race director. And with hindsight, Toto and I had a fairly heated exchange, in race control at that event, where Toto was obviously arguing his corner that his driver shouldn't be penalised. And I got a driver in hospital and a car taken out of the race and was obviously feeling pretty aggrieved by it. Really, after that race, I think we should have said, right, do you know what? There should only be one communication between the race director and team managers. But of course, at that point, the competitiveness becomes so driven that it's only natural you're going to do the best that you can for your team. So of course you're going to argue as strongly for your team as you possibly can. And I guess that came to no greater head in Abu Dhabi, where Toto at several points during the race was trying to not get a safety car. Then he didn't want, he was trying to steer the course of the race. And I guess as soon as you hear that, because I get that transmission, my immediate reaction is defense. I want to make sure, and my best form of defense is attack, to say, I want to represent our position in this, so that it's not one-sided, because the worst thing is last person in somebody's ear has the greatest influence. And so I think it's right that has stopped. And
would you say it was a contributing factor to what ultimately happened in Abu Dhabi?
I don't think so, because I think that the key factor was Latifi crashing and there being a relatively straightforward safety car with an amount of laps left, with the priority of being, let's get the race going again. And the only mistake made was not to let the two final cars, that if he had let them be unlapped, it wouldn't have made an ounce of difference. The outcome would have been identical to what happened.
But the fact that mistake was made, do you think it was partly driven by the fact that he had you and Toto in his ear?
I don't think so. I think he was, his pressure was he wanted to get the race going again, and that was within his power to do so. I mean, it would have been an absolute classic, probably the most competitive world championship we've ever had in Formula One. And as it turned out, it was the most viewed piece of sport during the entire, probably in the last decade. And of course, some people are going to feel aggrieved by it. Some people are impartial to it, and some are obviously massively pro what happened. But the reality is, Michael, the only mistake he made was not allowing the final two cars to unlap themselves, which there was plenty of time in which to enable them to do that.
I'm fascinated by your relationship with Toto. Was the friction between you real at times last year, or was it slightly hammed up for the TV cameras?
I think that we're in such a competitive sport, such a competitive business, and there was a huge amount going on track, and there was a lot going off track as we were establishing Red Bull powertrains. And I think that Toto, has always seen Red Bull as a threat, because it's a team that he's not ever managed to have a control or an input into, and so we've always been a bit of a maverick. So it was very intense, and because there was a lot going on off track, there was whilst recruitment was going on of key people from within Mercedes to come across and join Red Bull powertrains, then there was an awful lot of lobbying with the FIA on different car components and using the drivers' voices to do that, whether it was, rear wings, on our car in Barcelona, and yet front wings were allowed to flex with no issue. And it felt like, we were being played a bit, and there was a bit of a media circus as well that was being utilised. And so there was a narrative being created against Red Bull that was, I certainly felt was a bit unfair. Well, certainly against Max, that was very unfair.
Do you think the Max of 2022, with one world championship in his back pocket, would have done things differently last year? Do you think, for example, he might have fought Silverstone, Monza, Brazil in a different way?
No, I don't think so. I think that the Max we have now is just a slightly more polished version, but he's an attacking driver, and if I look at, he's convinced that Silverstone he left enough room. I think that we put him in the situation in Monza where he had a slow pit stop. He should have never been anywhere near Lewis, but again, he felt that there was enough room in the move that he made. Brazil, I mean, when you look at the advantage that Lewis had, the only car he couldn't pass for 30 odd laps was Max. Every other car, it took him a lap and a half to pass. And for me, that was a titanic drive by Max. And, he's fighting for a world championship, and he's the type of driver that gives it absolutely everything. And it was hard racing, but it was fair racing.
Did we get to a point, do you think, where they'd got in each other's heads and it was always going to end in the odd collision, and because neither was prepared to give anything?
Well, I think arguably maybe more so in Lewis's head, because suddenly he's the 7-time world champion that has everything to lose. Max is the young kid that's taking the risks, that's throwing everything at it and got nothing to lose. Some of his overtaking last year was stunning. And you felt that started to rattle Lewis. I think, we definitely saw, after Lewis qualified on pole at Silverstone and Max won the sprint race, you saw Lewis was, he was a bit broken after the sprint race. And, had Max made it through COPS, I don't think, they'd have seen him again that afternoon. So there's an air of desperation building in as well. And, it was high stakes stuff, and emotions run high, but it probably affected Lewis arguably more than Max, because, as I say, he'd got more to lose than Max. Max had everything to gain.
High stakes, as you say, but behind closed doors, was the respect from Max to Lewis real? Did you hear Max talk about Lewis as a driver and the respect that he had for him?
I think there's always been a respect there. I mean, you can't not respect everything that Lewis has done and achieved in the sport. Is remarkable. I mean, probably never to be bettered. But when everybody is beatable at some point in time, and I think Max had a respect for Lewis, but he wasn't in awe of him, or he wasn't afraid of him, or wasn't afraid, and he relished going up against him. He relished the opportunity to go wheel-to-wheel racing with him. And I think ultimately he believed that he could beat him. And it was that inner belief and self-confidence that on so many occasions you saw, come through.
You might not realise it, but competing in Formula One has many similarities to running a small business. There's high stakes, a lot of competition, and you need to have confidence in every new hire you make to help you reach your goals. That's why when you're hiring, it's important that you have access to the best and most qualified candidates available. LinkedIn Jobs can help you find the right people for your team faster and for free in just a few simple steps. Create your free job post online using their inbuilt tools like screening questions to ensure you're targeting the best people with the required skills and qualifications for the role. This is just one of the many ways LinkedIn Jobs can help you quickly prioritize who you want to interview and hire. And don't forget to add the purple #hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to let your network know that you're hiring so they can help spread the word as well. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/grid. That's linkedin.com/grid to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. You say we have a more polished version of Max this year, but the domination of your car has allowed him to be a little bit more polished, hasn't it? It would be really interesting to see how he would race wheel to wheel in a similar situation to last year.
I think the racing between him and Charles, think back to Bahrain or Saudi or some of those early races like Miami. There was phenomenal racing between the two of them, but not once did they ever touch each other.
Do you think Max races Charles in a different way to Lewis?
There's a difference. There's perhaps a different respect with Charles. They'd race each other since kids, and there was a mutual respect. I've never once ever heard Lewis recognise Max's ability. And so, of course, there was just a bit more needle to it, and you could feel that and you could sense that between those two drivers.
Now, Max can win the world title as early as Singapore next week. Do you think he'll approach that race similar to the 16 that have gone before? Do you think we might see any tightening up, doing anything different?
I doubt it very much. Max's best form of defence is attack. And
I think you and Max are quite similar in that way.
Well, that's the DNA of this team, that you've got to go for it. And we're an attacking team. We take on challenges, wholeheartedly, and that's part of the culture of, if you go defensive, you're conceding something. Best form of defence is attack, and I think that that's the same for every single race that we'll compete in for the rest of this year. And then the championship tables take care of themselves. But Max has had some amazing races this year, as has Checo, and it's not by accident he's got himself into this position.
How different will these world titles feel compared to last year, and indeed compared to the four in the early?
Well, if we're lucky enough to convert them, they'll feel a lot less stressful.
Do you mean that? If you're lucky enough to convert them when you are light years ahead in both championships, is it your mentality that you cannot accept that you can win these until they're actually in the bag?
No, look, nothing's done until it's done. We're in a wonderful position in the drivers and in the constructors, but you never allow yourself to get carried away. Maybe it's a British thing or whatever, I don't know. But the focus is on, right, let's do the best we can in every single race, and then the tables will take care of themselves, and don't take anything for granted. We were, 46 points behind when we lost Australia, and within 2 races we turned that round. So, there's big swings that are achievable, and sprint races and so on still to go. But we're in a healthy position, but it's never done until it's done.
What motivates you? The lure of success or the fear of failure? I
think it's both. I think what drives you on is to experience that feeling of seeing your cars cross the line first, to see your driver lift the winner's trophy, to see him become world champion, to see your team achieve the ultimate of becoming constructors world champion. And it's that fear of failure that, again, is a massive motivating factor. And it all depends on the type of person and type of character that you are.
Now, fear of failure segues nicely onto our next topic. which is Red Bull powertrains. And what I mean by fear of failure is I'm always reminded, when I think of you and power units, I just think of your relationship with Renault in the early era of the hybrid era. Was that the motivation to start your own powertrains business, is to never be left in that kind of situation again? Take care of your own destiny.
It was one of them. I mean, we're a demanding customer. We set high standards and we demand high standards. And in Honda, we've experienced for the first time a like-minded partner, and have had a wonderful partnership with Honda. But of course, when they elected to withdraw from the sport, we were faced with choices. Do we go back to being a customer where everything would be a compromise? Or do we take control of our own destiny? You know, one might say it's foolhardy and a huge risk for a subsidiary of an energy drinks manufacturer to go and try and produce its own engine and take on the likes of Mercedes-Benz and Ferrari and Renault and other manufacturers. So in typical Red Bull fashion, we embraced what would seem to be the impossible and took control of our own destiny. That puts us in a situation where we have everything under one roof. Other than Ferrari, we have engine engineers and designers sitting next to chassis engineers and designers, all on one campus here in Milton Keynes. And we believe that strategically offers a benefit for the long term. And again, you just take control of your own destiny. And like with the chassis, applying the same methodology of getting the right people, empowering them, having a can-do culture, and providing them with the right tools and equipment, why can't we produce a competitive power unit?
Indeed, but equally, why is being a customer a compromise these days, given that they're all meant to be the same?
Because there will always be compromises, whether it's onto the installation or the cooling or that intimate relationship that the engine forms with the chassis and the transmission, of the car, that suddenly you would have to, because we wouldn't, if you had a Ferrari engine, they're not going to make their cooling requirements based on a customer team, or Mercedes certainly wouldn't have supplied, or Renault with their own works team. There would have always been compromises, whereas with Honda we had no compromise, because they were only focused on us. And that was such a different relationship to what we'd previously experienced. It was like, well, we don't want to give that up. From quite a selfish perspective, that is an advantage to how we package and integrate within the chassis. So therefore, taking control and having that all under one roof and ownership makes a whole load of sense.
Why didn't you do this earlier, when you were getting very frustrated with Renault? There's that infamous quote from you: we're paying for first class, but we're getting an economy class seat from Renault. Why didn't you do it then?
I think because the investment at that time and the technology was so advanced, it would have been unimaginable, and we probably weren't mature enough as an organization to take that on. Whereas now, we're at a stage that we are that mature, that the regulations that have come in have allowed, with the homologated engines until the end of 25, it's allowed us that period of time to build up Red Bull powertrains for entry in 2026. And with regulations that are reasonably known, it enables us to take that plunge. And of course, with the budget cap as well, which was absolutely crucial element to becoming a power unit manufacturer, because otherwise we would never be able to compete with the likes of the manufacturer teams or OEMs that would have unlimited R&D budgets at their disposal.
Right, so the budget cap has allowed you to come in as Red Bull powertrains. But I did want to ask you, has the budget cap taken something away from the DNA of Formula One?
In some respects, I mean, we've got as many people in finance now as we do in the drawing office, and it's become an accounting world championship as much as a technical or a sporting one. But that's part of the challenge. And of course, compromises have had to be made, and we've had to reshape our organisation. Thankfully, we've managed to reallocate people into other areas of the organisation, whether it be powertrains or into Red Bull Advanced Technology, which of course is producing our own hypercar. It's driven efficiency in the business, which is a positive thing. But I think the problem that we have is we're too reliant on the cap, and the cost drivers are the technical regs. And these cars are still incredibly expensive to design and manufacture. And I think less emphasis should be played on the financial regs and more further upstream on the technical regs to be designing and producing simpler, more economic cars.
What, more standard parts?
Either more standard parts or more standard design or simpler design or restrictions in materials or updates, or there's many ways in which you could reduce the cost of these cars.
We all have those days, don't we? Days where you're struggling to get through your to-do list, still have a mountain of chores to do, and you've just realised you've got nothing in the house for dinner. Well, don't worry, because DoorDash is at your service. With DoorDash, you can get dinner, household essentials, and everything on your grocery list delivered in under an hour. You can even get hold of school supplies or fresh flowers if you need something for a last-minute special occasion. What's unique about DoorDash is that it gives you the option to support local businesses alongside the more well-known establishments out there. So you're not just getting the things you love, you're supporting the community you love as well. With more than 300,000 partners, you can support your neighbourhood go-tos and independent stores, or choose from your favourite national restaurants like Popeyes and Cheesecake Factory. From the stores and restaurants to the dashers driving around, each order you place provides a new opportunity for everyone involved, because with DoorDash, there is a neighbourhood of good in every order. For a limited time, our listeners can get 50% off and 0 delivery fees on their first order of $15 or more when you download the DoorDash app and enter the code GRID. That's 50% off, up to $12 in value, and 0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter the code GRID. Don't forget, that's code GRID for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. Subject to change, terms apply. Well, Christian, back to powertrains. Will any future partnership with you guys, will it have to include Red Bull powertrains? So could a manufacturer come to you and say, we want to get into bed with you guys, we're going to focus on you, but we're doing it all ourselves? Would that work for you?
Well, not really, because sort of a train's left the station now, where we've produced our own prototype engine, a full V6. We have a team of some of the best engineers in Formula One here. We've invested heavily in facilities and dynos and equipment and manufacturing capability. So we have all that ability under one roof now. We don't need a partner. However, you can never say never if there's somebody strategically that was ripe for the long term or offered some form of advantage that we wouldn't previously have access to.
Has Dietrich Mateschitz said to you, I want to win with my own power unit?
I think the pride that he had when he heard the first Red Bull engine fire into life was huge. It was huge for him and for the whole business. And there were people actually in tears in the dyno room because the amount of effort that had gone in. It was a historic moment for the company. That suddenly, Red Bull are not just a chassis manufacturer, they're a power unit manufacturer. And, where that leads us to with, the RB17 project, of course, the natural extension of that is that we produce an engine to go in our own car, track car. So that's tremendously, tremendously exciting.
Is there any truth that Honda would like to come back in as a works partner with you guys?
There's plenty of speculation. I think, Honda would announce their withdrawal because their range of vehicles were heading the electrical route, and obviously combustion engines didn't form part of their future. So it's difficult to imagine them doing a complete U-turn on that, but maybe there are elements that might want to come back in, or with the 50-50 split between combustion and electrical power with the future power unit. Maybe that is a route for them to retain an involvement in Formula One, but nothing that we're doing is in any way dependent or contingent upon that. We're very much on our own track.
In your experience of dealing with the manufacturers, is there a herd mentality in that you get, well, if they're doing it, I need to do it? So with Audi coming in, is there more pressure on other manufacturers to come in?
Well, it's great that the manufacturers are coming in. It just demonstrates how relevant Formula One is and how strong its marketing presence is, because we're seeing figures, viewing figures that we've never seen before. So it's a case of, the manufacturers sort of can't afford not to be, and many of them have announced that they've made their last ever combustion engine, yet here we are in Formula One committing to a V6 with sustainable fuels for for the future. And I think that it just demonstrates the strength of Formula One, because logically these guys would be going the Formula E route, but the emotion and the passion just isn't there from what I see in that form of racing. Whereas Formula One, it draws that raw emotion and technical excellence. So it's great to see a manufacturer like Audi and hopefully Porsche coming into Formula One, and a host of interest from many others.
What happened with you guys and Porsche?
We had some exploratory discussions with Porsche, and they're a great brand, a great company, to see what a potential collaboration could look like. But those talks reached a conclusion that it was felt best that we were better going it on our own and sticking to the original plan. So hopefully that doesn't rule out Porsche coming into the sport, because, as I say, they're a great brand, but it was impossible to see how the two companies could work effectively and what complementary support there would be.
Now, clearly there is an interest within Red Bull to do things outside of Formula One. The supercar project, the RB17 you've mentioned. You've got your own power unit division now. Will we see you guys getting involved in other championships, whether it's Formula E, or would IndyCar ever interest you guys in the way that McLaren are over there now?
Well, we've done bits and pieces. We did the aero screen in the IndyCar Championship. We're heavily involved in the America's Cup in Helsinki, the America's Cup. We are designing a submarine, a three-man submarine.
Well, stop there. Why are you doing that?
They're projects that advanced technology have taken on, and we're working with KTM in MotoGP with aerodynamic studies, and Chris Hoy, we've got a great project, going with him on the bicycle components, and BMC we're working with. So we've got a great list of customers that Advanced Technology is working with. And of course, the biggest single project within that is the RB17, the ultimate track car, taking everything that Adrian has done in his career and throwing it into the ultimate track car, which has got just insane levels of performance, and that's tremendously exciting for the whole company.
Does he think he can make a better track car than the Valkyrie?
Yeah, because he's totally unrestrained by the regulations, because as a track car, obviously there's safety regulations it has to pass, but there are not the stringent road car regulations that it has to comply with. So that makes it a far simpler project in many respects.
I touched on America IndyCar a moment ago. Would you consider an IndyCar team?
IndyCar teams are pretty specialist, and they run effectively like Formula 2 teams, where they run a customer car and so on. So it wouldn't really make a great deal of sense for us to get involved in.
Even if you're trying to get an American driver into Formula 1, because of course there's a lot of talk about Colton Herta joining AlphaTauri. I mean, on the subject of Colton, why are you guys so interested in him? Because he finished 10th in the championship this year. Do you still believe he's the best offering from that side of the pond?
Yes, but if you look a year ago, I mean, it's quite stunning what he was achieving. And I think that America's a huge market, and I think we're seeing that growth in the sport. And it would be great to give arguably the best current driver in America, or American driver, an opportunity in Formula One. Unfortunately, the licensing restrictions will probably prevent that from happening, but
is there a case for force majeure here, or do you respect the FIA
I think
stance?
We'll have to respect the FIA stance at the end of the day. That's down to the FIA to look at, and I know that they're doing that, but we'll accept obviously whichever decision they come up with. But it's something that needs looking at, because it shouldn't be so hard for drivers to transition from America's Premier Series into Formula One.
What about the Red Bull Junior program? Is that in good shape?
Yeah, it is. I think, we're continuing to invest in youth. We've got some great youngsters in the program, all the way from karting or stepping into Formula 4 now, upwards. And I think it's something that Red Bull have done so well, is giving these kids a chance, investing in young talent and giving opportunities that otherwise they wouldn't have had.
Who do we need to look out for?
There's a few guys. I mean, Isaac Hadjar, I think in Formula 3 this year's had a great debut season. I think Iwasa in Formula 2 has been a standout driver for me. So they're just two of the guys, on the program. Liam Lawson's had a tough year, but he's again had another talent. Dennis Hauger has been a bit underwhelming in Formula 2 after such a dominant year in Formula 3. But again, how much of that is him? How much of it is equipment?
You're still so clued up with all the young drivers, and for a man who's been involved in the sport for 30 years, first as a driver, I did want to ask you one final thing on drivers, and that is that if you were managing Oscar Piastri, where would he be racing in 2023? What was your take on that whole scenario?
It's a difficult one because I'm not privy to all the discussions and conversations. Oscar, he drove for the Arden team in Formula 4 and Formula Renault, and was obviously a significant talent, and there was an opportunity for Red Bull to look at him at the time, and we didn't take up that option, which is something that I regret. But what he went on to achieve is phenomenal in Formula 3 and Formula 2. Now, if he'd have been a driver here, there is no way that he wouldn't have been under lock and key for a period in time. So, as I say, I wasn't party, or it's difficult to judge what was promised or reneged on or so on. But it certainly was unexpected, and probably from several areas. And Fernando obviously dropped the stone in the pond and created the ripple that rolled out over numerous seats. But he's a great driver. I mean, the only problem that he now has to deal with is the expectation on him will be immense.
And do you rate Lando Norris?
Very much so. Very much so.
So he's got a serious teammate alongside.
He's going to have to get in and deliver against Lando, which is no mean feat. But you either sink or swim in this business, and he's a very, very capable driver. I'm sure he's going to do very well.
Christian, I feel we're up to date. Thank you very much for your time. It's been great to have you back on the show. 6 to go, 2 World Championships almost in the bag. Best of luck with it all.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again.
You either sink or swim in this business. Very true words. And it's not a surprise to hear Christian saying them, because he's so competitive. He's a fighter, and he has a stellar track record in Formula 1. Christian, many thanks for your time and for your insights. What you said about the team, about Abu Dhabi last year, and about the future of Red Bull powertrains was fascinating. And I really want to know more about the 3-man submarine that you're building. That sounds like a fun test drive. As ever, please send in your thoughts and stories about Christian, and I'll read out a few of them at the end of next week's show. Send them to me at Tom Clarkson F1, or use the hashtag F1BeyondTheGrid. Which brings me on to what you sent in about Timo Glock after last week. Reliving Brazil 2008 brought back a lot of memories for many of us, didn't it? Let's start with this from David Kundal. It was great to hear from Timo. I always felt that he was very harshly maligned after Brazil 2008, and it was even worse to hear of the various threats that he and his family received in the aftermath. Well, thanks for the message, David, and you're right. The after effects of what happened at Interlagos that year were horrendous for Timo, and it seems ridiculous that a driver of his ability should be so harshly maligned by a situation that he could do nothing about. Let's go next to Gabriel Sturmer. As a Brazilian F1 fan, he says, I held a grudge against Timo for a lot longer than I'm proud to admit. He comes across as such a nice character, and he was a great F1 racer at the time. Well, thanks for the note, Gabriel, and I'm sure you're not the only Brazilian F1 fan to have held a grudge against Timo after Interlagos 2008. But I'm glad we've been able to tell his side of the story. Finally, let's hear from Polish Eddie. I'm sure this podcast is definitely going to help change a lot of people's minds about Timo, and rightfully so. He's a great guy and obviously innocent of any wrongdoing in Brazil 2008. Well, let's hope so, because Timo is a great guy and he's a great driver. We'll leave it there for this week for your messages, but thank you to everyone who wrote in. I read them all. You're very opinionated. That's my conclusion after this week. That's almost the end of the show. If you're hungry for more on Red Bull's journey in Formula One, then you can listen to our previous conversations with Christian Horner and Sergio Perez in the Beyond the Grid back catalogue. You'll find links in the episode description. And while you're there, make sure you follow F1 Beyond the Grid so you don't miss an upcoming episode, and maybe leave us a rating or a review as well. And why not share this episode with a friend or your fellow F1 fans on social? Thanks for listening. F1 Beyond the Grid is produced by F1 and Audio Boom Studios. Until next time, keep it flat out.